You didn't lie. You didn't approve it. You didn't cause the harm. You didn't start the problem. You didn't design the system. You didn't make the call. But you stayed quiet. Just long enough. Just carefully enough. Just reasonably enough. And that was the day silence stopped being patience and became a decision. Silence does not look powerful. It looks harmless. It looks like staying in your lane. It looks like being professional. It looks like not making things worse. It looks like letting the right people handle it. In most organizations, the loud voices get blamed. The quiet ones get trusted. Because silence feels safe. It feels mature. It feels responsible. But power does not only live in what is said, it also lives in what is allowed to continue. It lives in what is not challenged, and it lives in what quietly passes from one meeting to the next, unchanged. Most people believe power belongs to the person who signs, the person who speaks last, the person whose name is on the door. But real influence is often exercised much earlier, by the people who decide not to interrupt the direction of the room, not because they agree, but because they do not want to slow things down. Silence rarely announces itself as influence. It hides behind good intentions. It hides behind timing. It hides behind the belief that someone else will say something. Later. But later is not a moment. It is a habit. And habits shape outcomes. In American workplaces, communities, and institutions, silence often becomes the smoothest way to belong. You stay aligned. You stay trusted. You stay inside the circle. And slowly, without ever meaning to, you begin to help protect the very thing you once questioned. Silence is not only the absence of words, it is a choice about direction. It is a decision about what deserves interruption. It is a judgment about what is worth the risk of speaking. Most people think silence means neutrality, but silence is rarely neutral. Silence takes the side of whatever already has momentum, whatever already has protection, whatever already has influence. In real life, silence usually comes dressed as responsibility, as professionalism, as emotional intelligence, as being a team player, as not creating unnecessary tension. Silence often wears the costume of wisdom, but underneath that costume, there is always a calculation. Is this worth the trouble? Is this my role? Is this the right moment? Will this actually help? Those questions are not wrong. They are human. But when they become permanent, they quietly replace a much harder question. Is this right? In leadership, the most dangerous shift is not when people stop caring. It is when they start redefining what caring looks like, and silence becomes their new language of concern. It usually begins with something small, a line removed from a report, a sentence softened in an email, a question that never makes it onto the agenda, a name missing from a meeting invitation, a decision explained just well enough that no one pushes back. Nothing dramatic, nothing that would justify calling it a crisis, just a quiet, uncomfortable awareness. Something isn't right. You don't need proof. You don't need an investigation. You don't need a whistleblower. But you have something much quieter. You have awareness, the kind that shows up as tension in your chest, as hesitation before you nod, as a pause before you type, "Looks good to me." You notice how carefully the conversation is shaped, how quickly the room moves past certain details, how easily difficult questions are postponed, how often everyone agrees a little too quickly. And in that moment, no one looks at you. No one asks what you think. No one invites your concern. But you still feel it. Because awareness does not need permission to exist. It only needs honesty. And this is the moment that matters most. Not when damage becomes public. Not when consequences are visible. But when you are still early enough to interrupt the direction of the room. Before silence becomes easier than courage. In the first story, the pause mattered. The pause was meant to create space for truth, space for conscience, space for courage. But there is a quiet moment when a pause changes. It stops being reflection and becomes avoidance. A pause is temporary. Silence is what happens when you decide not to return. A pause says, "Let me think." Silence says, "I will let this continue." A pause opens the door for truth to enter the room. Silence quietly keeps it outside. At first it feels responsible. You tell yourself you are being careful. You tell yourself you are waiting for better timing. You tell yourself you don't yet understand the full picture. And sometimes that is true. But there is a line, a subtle line. And once you cross it, you are no longer thinking. You are choosing. You are choosing not to interrupt, not to slow the process, not to disturb the agreement that is already forming around you. The most dangerous moment is not when you hesitate. It is when you decide that hesitation is enough, because that is when a pause becomes permission, and silence becomes a direction. You may tell yourself something important. I didn't create this. I'm not the one in charge. I don't have final authority. And often, that is true. You did not design the policy. You did not start the project. You did not set the tone years ago. But you are here now. You are in the room. You are on the email. You are part of the conversation. You have access. You have context. You have a voice that carries weight, even if it is not the loudest one. Not causing harm does not automatically mean not participating in it. Yes, because influence is not measured only by who decides. It is measured by who can interrupt, who can slow the process, who can ask the uncomfortable question before momentum becomes irreversible. Responsibility is not reserved for the person at the top. It is distributed to everyone who understands what is happening and still allows it to continue. You do not need full control to carry moral responsibility. You only need proximity. You only need awareness. You only need the ability to change the direction of the room, even slightly. And that is what makes silence powerful. Not because you have authority, but because you have access. Most systems do not survive because people inside them are cruel. They survive because people inside them are busy, overloaded, under pressure, trying to protect what still works, and trying to hold things together. A system does not need everyone to agree. It only needs enough people to stop interrupting it, enough people to keep things moving, enough people to decide that this is not the moment to slow down, not the moment to challenge, not the moment to complicate the process. Most organizations are not protected by force. They are protected by rhythm. Meetings, deadlines, approvals, schedules, momentum. Silence becomes the oil in that machine. It keeps everything running smoothly. It prevents disruption. It protects timelines. It avoids emotional mess. It allows difficult truths to be postponed. Again, and again, and again. This is why silence feels helpful. It reduces friction. It protects stability. It preserves normal. But stability is not the same as health. And normal is not the same as right. Most systems are sustained not by cruelty, but by quiet cooperation, by people who care, by people who want things to work, by people who do not want to become the problem. And without ever meaning to, they begin to protect the process, more than the people the process was meant to serve. Most people who stay quiet are not trying to protect harm. They are trying to protect people, their team, their department, their clients, their students, their community, their family. They are carrying more than one responsibility at the same time. Deadlines, budgets, staff shortages, burnout, health issues, personal pressure no one else sees. They are not choosing silence because they do not care. They are choosing silence because they care about too many things at once. Well, silence feels like the least damaging option. It feels like the way to avoid breaking what is already fragile. It feels like the way to keep everyone moving forward. And in American culture, we deeply value resilience. We admire people who hold things together, who absorb pressure, who stay composed, who do not create disruption. So silence becomes a form of strength, a form of loyalty, a form of responsibility. But there is a quiet danger hidden inside that story. When you care about everyone, but never interrupt what is hurting someone, care slowly loses its courage, and responsibility quietly becomes containment. Not because your heart changed, but because your fear of making things worse became stronger than your willingness to make things honest. This is how silence becomes attractive to good people. It's not because they stopped believing in what is right, but because they started believing that speaking up would cost too much. The most dangerous silence is not the first one. The first one feels heavy, awkward, uncomfortable. You notice it. You remember it. You replay it in your head on the drive home. The most dangerous silence is the second one, and the third, and the one that no longer tightens your chest. Because something subtle changes. What once felt wrong now feels familiar. What once felt urgent now feels complicated. What once felt worth interrupting now feels like part of how things work. This is how silence becomes normal, not through a decision to stop caring, but through repetition. The same conversation structure, the same names speaking, the same concerns delayed, the same outcomes justified. And over time, your nervous system adapts. Your expectations adjust. Your standards quietly lower. Not because you wanted them to, but because your environment trained you to survive inside them. You stop asking whether something should continue. You start asking how to manage it. You stop asking who is being affected. You start asking how to protect the process, and that is the shift that matters most. Because once silence feels normal, it no longer feels like a choice. It feels like reality. And when silence becomes reality, it stops being questioned. It starts being defended. Here's the part most people never realize. If you have influence, your silence still teaches. Every time you stay quiet in a room where something is off, you send a signal. Not with words, with permission. And others watch what you do not challenge. They notice what you let pass. They pay attention to which moments make you uncomfortable and which ones you allow to move on. Over time, people stop waiting for your voice. They start reading your silence, and they learn something from it. They learn what is safe to question. They learn what is risky to mention. They learn what must be protected. They learn what must be ignored. Culture is not shaped only by what leaders say. It is shaped by what leaders tolerate. And leadership does not disappear when you stop speaking. It simply changes form. Because every time you choose not to interrupt a direction, you help confirm it. Every time you avoid a difficult truth, you help make it easier for the next person to avoid it too. As every time you stay quiet to keep things comfortable, you quietly teach others that comfort matters more than courage. This is how silence becomes leadership. Not because you wanted to lead, but because people were watching how you responded and learning what was acceptable. Some people understand this moment of silence through faith, through prayer, through scripture, through a personal relationship with God. For them, silence is not only professional, it is spiritual. It is the moment they realize they are answering to more than a room, more than a supervisor, more than a system. Others understand this moment in a different language, through human dignity, through professional ethics, through history, through the simple refusal to harm what they are responsible to protect. Different beliefs, same moral weight. So this story is not about persuading anyone to adopt a religion. It is about recognizing a boundary, a line you do not cross, even when you could, a voice you do not silence, even when no one would notice. For people of faith, that boundary may come from God. For others, it may come from a deep sense of responsibility to human life. But the function is the same. It places something above your comfort, above your convenience, above your fear. And that is what makes leadership safer for others. Because when nothing stands above you, people beneath you become exposed. True leadership is not created by belief systems. It is sustained by restraint, by the willingness to answer to something greater than momentum, greater than approval, greater than your own protection. Different beliefs, same responsibility. At what point does staying quiet stop being patience and start becoming permission? At what point does protecting peace become protecting harm? At what point does loyalty become complicity? Who pays for the calm your silence protects? Not in a dramatic moment, not in a public scandal, in a normal workday, in a closed meeting, in a message that will never be forwarded, in a decision no one will ever trace back to you. Because this is how silence is truly tested, not when the world is watching, but when no one is. And the only person who will ever know why you stayed quiet is you. The day you stayed silent was the day silence became a decision. In a culture that rewards comfort, conscience often feels inconvenient. We are taught to be efficient, to be agreeable, to keep things moving. We are praised for not making waves, for being adaptable, for knowing how to survive inside complex systems. But leadership is not measured by how well you protect the flow. It is measured by what you are willing to interrupt. Because the people who are most affected by your silence are rarely in the room. They do not sit at the table. They do not speak in the meeting. They do not get to explain what your decision or your hesitation will mean for their lives. And that is why silence carries weight, not because it is loud, but because it travels quietly, directly, into other people's futures. The day you stayed silent was the day silence became a decision. This is a reflective leadership story. It does not represent any person, organization, or institution.